Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Wandering Road podcast. I'm your host, Chris, and joining me today is my good friend and host of the Southern Demonology podcast, Mr. JJ.
Woohoo!
Thanks for coming on, JJ. It's been a while. The last time we recorded together was back in October before you took a little escapade to Japan. How was your trip, man?
It was phenomenal. And yes, you should be very honored to have such an esteemed person as myself on your show.
All I see right now on my stream is a talking picture because
Well,
somebody's battery died.
yeah, because I'm awesome like that. What can I say?
Yeah, that was,
In fact, I will be in less than a month, I'll be heading back.
and I am totally not jealous with all the pictures you sent me of all the places you biked to, which is insane.
Dude, yeah, I was biking up to what, 26 kilometers a day. It
A
was
day.
a day. I only did that a handful of times, but it was interesting and I loved it.
Yeah, it does sound like a good time, especially all the photos you sent me of those like shops with memorabilia and stuff for like anime things and how dirt cheap it was compared to over here. So,
Especially with the phenomenal conversion rate.
Mr. buying retro consoles over there for dirt cheap.
Although
Whatever.
the BOJ is on Friday is about to announce stricter interest rate hikes to hopefully curb some of that inflation. So yeah, we may not be enjoying such amazing interest. I mean, such amazing um rates coming up. So we'll have to see.
Yeah. But Mr. JJ, you are joining me today to discuss something that we've talked about in the past, but we never really talked about on an episode, and it's the concept of demonic attachments. And I know I brought this up to you as a potential topic, as an official topic of discussion, like 3 days ago or something of that sort. And on top of that, later on in the show, if you're comfortable with sharing, I would like to talk about your journey into that side of, I guess, religion or spirituality in which you have talked about, wanting to combat against the enemy. Is that a good way of putting it?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way of putting it.
Yeah. So we have an interesting one for today, folks. But let's just jump right into it. So, the concept of demonic attachment, and the reason that this came about as a topic is because you and I have talked about demonic possession, exorcisms, the whole nine till we've been blue in the face. But I don't think we really talked about demonic attachment and what that is specifically. And the reason that I want to talk about this topic is because of something that has to do with the house that I grew up in. So recently, and I'm not going to, divulge any names or anything like that. I was told that in a specific room, the previous owners that lived there, my family member was told, that was one of the owners of the home, was told by neighbors across the street that the people that lived there prior to us practice some occult type things. And that led to summoning whatever is in that home being there. I don't
Well,
know.
given what you have described of your experiences growing up in that particular residence, that would not surprise me the least bit in the world.
Yeah, so I don't remember. I barely remember these neighbors because they were very old at the time. My aunt was told by these neighbors, like, Are you going to cleanse that home before you move in?" And they asked multiple times, Was the home cleansed before you moved in and after you moved in? Whatever happened there happened. I don't know, I guess, the validity of it. Me being who I am, I want to go and look for, like, newspaper articles. Was this in the news? Was somebody reported missing? Things of that
Right.
sort. So I've yet to go down that path, which I probably will. So I just treat it as hearsay. But the fact of the matter is, whatever's there is there. I dealt with it, and I'll open the floor to you. What are your thoughts of what I just said, and we can just go into explaining what demonic attachments are.
Couple of things. So there are two different kinds, I would say. You have your demonic attachment of person, and then you can have your demonic attachment of place. And that makes total sense because there are two different types of exorcism that can be performed. It's either exorcism of place or locale and exorcism of person. And in our demonology series, we've covered essentially the two types which you most see associated with the demonic attachment of person, and that is um, oppression and obsession. Obsession is essentially the mental hooks that an entity can dig in. And then oppression is when that also moves over into the physical realm. And of place, I've covered this a tad bit, but I haven't really kind of spelled it out. In my episodes on House on Haunted Hill, we kind of discussed the idea of generational curses. And in fact, I think that's what I ended my most recent season 5 was talking about generational curses. And that is something that is on the land itself. The best way for a place to attract a demonic spirit is through either a open invitation or through heinous acts that are performed that can essentially function as the exact same thing. I've covered a few different cases of Father Birdsong, where the very first time I interviewed Deacon Josh, we were covering such a case where him and his father drove down to a family that had taken in a an older teen who was conducting these types of rituals in their house and invited something in. And you also have got these generational curses, which the entity becomes so strong that it essentially latches itself to that place. And I myself grew up in a place which I'm pretty sure has a generational curse applied to it, in addition to just a haunted house. Not nearly to the extent that you had, but it was bad enough for my own example.
Now I got a question for you, JJ. Is it possible for something demonic to do both? Not just be attached to a location, but also plague a particular person?
Yeah, it absolutely can. Now, there is a technical difference between the supernatural and the preternatural. The preternatural essentially means that it is locked to either a time or a place or a person. whereas a supernatural event or entity is not locked at all. They supersede that. The demonic falls into that preternatural type of realm. So a place can be underneath demonic influence, and at the same time, it can affect an individual or individuals that are in that place. However, it could also extend further outward and affect other people at the same time. But usually, it would almost have to focus its energies on one or the other. Now, if a person is inhabiting a place that has a demonic attachment, then it's easy to do two things at once or three things at once. I think it's important to point out the difference between the preternatural and the supernatural in that regard.
That's good you point that out. Now, here's my follow-up question. So, with the preternatural, if they are summoned to said location, they are bound to said location? They can't move or follow people?
Oh no, they absolutely can. It's almost like it can only focus its attention on one thing at a time.
I see.
But that doesn't mean that it can't follow a person no matter where they happen to go. And I think this is the case you get a lot with a lot of other places that have demonic attachments to them. The person will go into a house or an apartment, wherever it happens to be, they will move and they will then still suffer the same kinds of afflictions that were thrust upon them in that original location. And essentially, it's almost like a plague because the thing can shift back and forward. You've now given it multiple homes, essentially. It may only be able to go one or the other, but it doesn't mean that, it's physically bound to one place. If it likes the taste of you, then it will definitely, like a dog after a steak, it will follow along until it gets it.
Here's my other question. Let's say there is an individual that moves into a haunted home. They don't know it's a haunted home.
Mhm.
Eventually, they have certain experiences and they end up staying in a room in the house where I guess the entity is its strongest because for whatever reason, let's say, for example, the ritual was performed to summon it in that particular room.
Yep.
Years down the line, decades, like 1 or 2 decades, right? And said individual still dreams of being plagued by this entity or whatever and has night terrors. Yeah, does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, it
Is
absolutely does, because 'cause you're dealing with an entity that has never been human and has existed for God only knows how long. What's a day or a decade or a century to this thing? It's
right.
nothing. It's a drop in the bucket.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean, the length of time really doesn't matter. If it can establish its hooks into an individual, and especially if that person was in the house where this thing was the strongest, then that's going to make it easy to sink those hooks in right off the bat. It's no wonder that individual is still suffering from these types of spiritual maladies, I guess you could call them.
What would you say if you were sorry, that was my cat, scared the crap out of me. His little pointy ears just come around the corner. If you were told that someone was dealing with night terrors, you know their background. They lived in a haunted home for whatever particular reason, they don't believe in it, whatever, right? But they're plagued by night terrors. It's the same person or entity in the dream every time. Let's say, for example, they're having a night terror, someone's with them, and they observe them having these terrors, and they're like, this isn't normal. You know what? Let me pray over you, right? And then during that prayer, that person starts to laugh maniacally in their sleep. What would you categorize that as? Are we going
Uh,
from attachment or is that getting escalated?
well, I mean, attachment is really more appropriately described as either of a person. It's more accurately described as demonic obsession or oppression. In that situation, I mean, it has its hooks thoroughly embedded, and you're moving from just a pure mental state and it crosses into the physical.
Mhm.
And so I would absolutely say that it has got a really firm foothold in the door, like the most annoying salesman ever known to humanity.
Right.
And more drastic steps need to be taken because otherwise that can lead into a much more severe case. And there's a possibility that, that is opening the doorway into possession itself.
That is a good explanation. My other follow-up question, I didn't mean to turn this into a Q&A, but you got
No,
my
no,
mind
go
jogging.
for it.
What do you do? Well, not saying you specifically, but in the instance this is going on, how would you handle someone that doesn't believe this is happening to them? They're not attributing it to the supernatural or the preternatural. They refuse to accept that explanation or refuse to do anything to go get help for one particular reason or the other. You think that's the doing of the demonic attachment?
No, I mean, I'm not saying that it's impossible that it is, but it could definitely be the influence of the thing to keep the person resistant to that idea. But at the same time, person who is undergoing that affliction has to be the one to step forward and say, I need help. If you don't choose that path, if you choose to embrace it and keep it around, there's nothing that can pry it away from you at that point. It's almost as if it's turned into a truly parasitic relationship. You've got to be willing to burn it off or do whatever it takes in order to get rid of it. But if you're not willing to do that, because I mean, I'll be honest with you, I myself suffered from horrendous nightmares my entire life. And yes, they are scary, especially when those dreams crosses the boundary from just mental night terrors when it crosses into the physical pain. That's not ever supposed to happen. But yet at the same time, not when you're having it, but afterwards, it's almost like you kind of relish that. It's like, God, look at what I'm dreaming. Isn't this terrifying? It becomes a good story. And you kind of relish that. And you can actually hold tighter to that stuff, even though it's terrifying, but it's almost like a sick fascination with it.
Right.
And if you're not willing to let that go,
Yeah. Would you say that was the case for you with your nightmares while you had them?
there was a little bit of that. I mean, but so let me tell you what I did. I covered this in Southern Demonology. I had a last year, I had three dreams of the demonic back to back to back. And they were painful. They were scary as hell. I was kind of done with it. And I went on a show for the Nicolean TV group. And I was bringing this up to the bishop I was talking to, and they sent me a kit that had a Saint Benedict medal and some exorcised oil and exorcised holy water. And I started to wear that Saint Benedict medal. And I did the same thing with the medal that I got from Father Birdsong as well. I was wearing both of them. And I didn't think that it would stop these dreams from happening. I just wanted to stop the more severe aspects of those dreams from occurring. And that was during Lent of last year. I have been nightmare free since wearing these Saint Benedict medals. And now I just sleep with them next to my bed. And I
Is it
still
this
have
one
not,
that I
yes,
have
it
here?
is. And I still have not had a nightmare. And in fact, when I went and visited my mom, because she suffers from horrendous nightmares herself, I brought her a giant Saint Benedict medal that I got from Deacon Josh that I purchased on his Etsy shop. I left it at her house. If she can derive the same kind of benefit that I've had from it, then all the better for it. In fact, I've gotten Father Birdsong to send me an entire large cache of these medals so that I can give them out to anyone who contacts me and wants one of them for themselves.
Did your mom say if it helped her?
So the entire time I was there, I don't think she had a single nightmare. I'm gonna follow up and find out for sure. I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting. But clearly
Yes,
it
it
worked for
would.
you. Clearly it worked for you.
It did. I have not had a nightmare in going on 8 or 9 months now, and it's been to say that it's been life changing is an understatement.
I know what your next nightmare is going to be.
I don't want to see you in a dress. I'm sorry.
Your next nightmare is going to be you're going to dream of you're in your house and you wake up and you're like, oh shit, I got to go record a podcast. You get on the podcast. You're like, you know what? I'm thirsty. You open up your fridge and it's nothing but bottles of water.
No. That would be the ultimate nightmare. Or I open it up and there's just nothing in there, and I'm like, yeah, I've got to have diet Dr. Pepper or diet root beer in my fridge. If I don't, then I don't feel right.
Yeah, listeners, it's our inside joke. I always give him shit because anytime he's on camera or we're talking on Discord or something, he's always cracking open a can of soda. So,
That would be accurate. I start the day off with my tankard o coffee. I have it, and then I switch to soft drinks for the rest of the day. I haven't actually had a glass of water in going on, I don't know, a decade.
oh, come on.
Yeah, and I like it.
Dude, drink at least a cup of water. At least
No,
one a day.
I don't like water.
Dude,
Like coffee is water.
it's not
It's
the same.
spicy water.
You need an exorcism. Belfelgor has a hold on you.
No, well, that's a special relationship.
I have another question about your nightmares. So you've been using the medals, no
Yep.
nightmares for almost a year. Gave one to your mom, no nightmares while you were down visiting her in Tennessee. What do you think? Do you think it was some sort of curse? Do you think it was some sort of demonic attachment that's been attached to your family for the longest time that no one ever really knew how to get rid of? Like,
I
what do you
mm,
think was going on there?
so, yeah, and I wish I had a definitive answer of, it is definitely this, and it can be nothing but this. I don't know that. But if I had to hazard a guess, I'm gonna say this right off the bat. I am a huge believer in science. I don't buy a lot of these wishy-washy type you know, of explanations. So for me to come out and say what I'm going to say, this is something that my body is physically resisted looking at and believing in for the longest time until I've been shown until the absence of what I've been going through, I can't explain it any other way. I think this originated with the property that I grew up on, the land that I grew up on was affected by a generational curse, and that manifested itself into these horrendous nightmares and night terrors. And that either was because of or grew into a form of demonic obsession where something had a hold of my brain. And it was only going through wearing these medals, praying, fervently, was I then freed from this. The more I've thought about it, the more I've consulted with others, that really does seem to be the case.
I mean, it's hard to even know what it is. Oh, I do have to ask you, has your son ever experienced them?
No, but then again, he never grew up in that house. I don't think he ever stepped foot in the property because by that point, it was a decrepit log cabin that had the floors falling in, was infested with brown recluse spiders, and we never let anybody into that place. And we eventually, yeah, my mom actually just got through last last year, or the year before, uh, she had it tore down.
So you think the generational curse was attached to the log cabin or the land itself?
I would say the land, but that log cabin, it had stood in that spot for 200 plus years. And I lived in that log cabin until I was in 8th grade. And then, yeah, moved into another place right behind it.
If you're comfortable, want to move into save the best for last, right? The last part of the show. You have expressed to me and to Father Mike wanting to get involved, with helping people that could potentially be suffering with, I guess, what's a good way to put it? The demonic?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good way of putting it. Even early on in the podcast, I expressed an interest in becoming like an assistant to an exorcist somewhere. In fact, when I wanted to become a priest earlier in my life, that was the mission that I wanted to go through. I wanted to be an exorcist. And I've always have had this desire to pursue that kind of work and aid the people. And actually, it's been through this podcast that I've been able to now start doing some of that. I have taken place in consultations with people. Those are all strictly private, so I can't share any of the particulars around that. But I've gone through, I think, 4 or 5 of those now. And when I went to go visit Father Birdsong in Georgia, just over the holiday season, when I was in Tennessee to see my mom, I got to do my very first in person consultation. It's been frightening, but it has been some of the most rewarding stuff that I have done in a very long time.
I know you said that you can't divulge any private information, which I completely understand. But if I could ask you this, when you did your consultations, did you, well, let me put it this way. When you did those consultations, both online and in person, when you did the one in person, what was the drastic difference as opposed to doing it online? Or was there none?
No, there definitely was. It, I think that there was two large things. The first is being shown the picture of a thunderstorm and then being in the vicinity of one where you can feel the hairs on the back of your neck lift straight up. It was much more visceral. being in person. But on the other hand, you were able to deliver comfort in person, showcase that we're here, we believe you, and we want to do everything that we can to help. And so it becomes so much more personal because you were there with those individuals rather than just staring at them through a computer screen. Now, don't get me wrong, the virtual consultations definitely have their place, especially when it's not possible to be in the same room with each other. But there is something special about being there with that individual.
Got it. Now, let me throw out a hypothetical for you. Um, let's say, for the sake of this example, I'm someone that I've I'm dealing with night terrors. I've had a string of bad luck. I always feel like something's watching me, and someone or something is watching me. I just feel uncomfortable,
Mhm.
and I reach out to you, and I'm like, JJ, I think there's something. I don't know what it is. I think it may be demonic. I don't know what it is. What would you do at that point to kind of make a determination? Like, okay, this guy's bullshitting me, or maybe we do have something real on our hands here.
So, unfortunately, in doing this kind of stuff, you do get, I don't know if it's Munchausen by proxy syndrome or if it's, just trying to be a troll, but you do get cases where people are just putting on a show in order to get attention.
Hmm.
All you can do is first, at least for me, at least I'm honest in my desire to help. I'm coming at this with an openness to learn, to figure out what might be going on, and to see what I can do to advise them, um, to aid in this particular situation that they find themselves in. The second thing is I always ask for all the background, all the details. And that can take quite a while to get out of to figure out what may be going on. Normally, you can tell pretty easily that most people have pretty decent bullshit detectors. If you hear
Right.
them stifling a laugh or something like that, then you're just wasting time. Or if they never bother to contact you again, you're like, yeah, okay, that's probably BS. But usually, I've only had one of those, and those are really more, I would say, email related. People just sending crazy things over. They're shooting over fake ghost things. And they're like, this is happening to me. And I'm like, yeah, no, it's not. But those that actually follow through and devote the time to walk you through what's going on and spend hours with you, that's some time investment there. And, that's always usually a really good sign that no, this is legit and we got to take care of that.
You haven't seen like have someone come on camera with like the full black eyes or nothing yet, have
Oh,
you?
there's been no like people being beat up or anything like that, but there's
Strange
some
behavior.
there's some horrifying shit that I have heard. I mean, things in which if I would never willingly expose myself to. And there are things that I've heard in which have made me go off and pray really, really hard, not just for that person, but to also protect myself and the house that I'm in and my family. There's some scary things out there. When you're there to help people, there's always a risk that it's going to come back onto you.
Kind of answered it already, but have you ever felt like after you talked to someone, or even when you went to the church and actually talked to someone in person, that you had a feeling that whatever it was knew you were talking about it?
Oh yeah. And that's why I
What did that
have
feel like to you?
it feels like being watched by something that is not present with you.
Mm.
And I don't mean like you feel eyes. It's like you feel something weighing you down. and it's the most sinister of feelings that I have ever felt in my life, and I did not like it whatsoever. But yeah, that's when I whipped out the purified and exercised oil and exercised holy water and was liberally dabbling it all around because it didn't do my heart any good. I'll put it that way.
Oh, yeah. I could only imagine what that actually, no, I can't only imagine what that feels like because I've experienced it myself.
I can imagine you did.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
I will say this: if
Okay, go ahead.
anyone out there wants a Saint Benedict medal, I am happy to provide one. I'm not talking about charging for it. All you have to do is go to southerndemonology.com, hit the contact form, or contact me through any of the other social media channels that I have. That's all on the website. And I am happy to do so. If you need a consultation, don't hesitate to reach out. And if it's something in which is above my pay grade, which I ran into situations like that, then I'm happy to get other people involved that, are much more appropriate for the situation. But all I want to do is to help. And the ability to build community and to aid those that find themselves in impossible to believe situations.
I completely agree. That's kind of why I do this podcast. I can't help you spiritually, but I think Dean and I kind of do a service for free.
Oh,
We,
absolutely. And I
we,
think that's why we've become such amazing friends, is because we do this out of the same kind of spirit. We're not here to promote bullshit theories that other people do on the internet that rack them up. Yeah, they can get 100,000 likes on the video or whatever it may be, but at the end of the day, they're contributing complete fabrications. Whereas us, we're there to connect with people and to ultimately help them.
I think the last question or two I may have for you, JJ, sticking on the topic, you going into the realm of kind of assisting,
Mhm.
dealing with the enemy. What is your biggest fear and what can someone do to courteously distance themselves if you think this is getting way too deep for me? Like this is getting way more than I expected it to be.
Well, my greatest fear is to invite that darkness into my own life or into the lives of my family. That's my greatest fear. And if it's too much, A, don't openly invite things into your life. But B, if you find yourself in a corner and you know it's too much for you, bow out. Don't continually keep shoving your face into the mire. Wash it off and step back if you possibly can and protect yourself. Uh, you know, say your prayers, surround your living space with um, religious icons. Do whatever it is that will make your soul feel like you're in touch with God in order to protect yourself. That would be what I would recommend.
I think that makes sense and I think that's fair. JJ, I think this has been an interesting conversation. And this conversation came about out of the blue in a sense that I learned some things that I just kind of wanted your input on. And I think this has been a productive conversation, especially for me. It's been really enlightening. And I will say, I am too much of a chicken to try and do what you do, with these consultations and with
Oh, I'm
helping
not
people.
pretending like I'm not a chicken. I absolutely am. But at the same time, there's just something that is urging me on. and I feel like I need to do it. It's a bizarre feeling, but and this has been a tough conversation because you're dealing with things that are not of the material realm. They're not evidence based. They're not floating before your eyes. They're dealing with things that are unseen, and it's the negative side of the unseen.
Right.
It can be hard to buy, and yeah, but they're there. At least I'm thoroughly convinced that they're there, and I think you're in the exact same boat on that one.
Oh, as am I. And I think the one thing we did not point out is that it's very important to mention that things that may potentially seem to be of the infernal may not necessarily be the case, especially when it comes to psychological issues. Like, that's where
Yep,
you have to be very careful.
exactly. This is why the Catholic Church insists upon rigorous medical and psychological exams by practitioners that it knows and trusts in order to ensure that because the absolute last possibility should be of demonic attachment, influence, possession, etc. And there absolutely should be a very high bar to exclude any more mundane reasons for why a situation may be occurring.
I don't know if this is the case with you and Father Mike, but when you talk to folks, but I personally think from my perspective, if I was going into that type of situation, I would maintain a healthy amount of skepticism until proven otherwise. Is that a fair assessment to say, or is that kind of detrimental?
That's a good question. So, because you want to be open, you
Right.
don't want to close yourself off, you don't want to make knee jerk reactions. But at the same time, you do have to try to get to the bottom of the situation and figure out what that root cause may be. And so there's an entire litany of questions that should be asked in order to illuminate what might be going on. And I take that part very seriously. That kind of, and it's not an interrogation, it's just more of an open question. Because if you can't identify what that root cause is, then you may be causing a lot more harm than good.
I think that is a good way of looking at it and a good way of putting it. But JJ, thank you once again for being such an awesome guest and coming on the show. I
Of
appreciate you coming
course.
on. I
I
appreciate your
appreciate
time.
you having me, man. You know that. Thoroughly enjoy the times in which either the two of us or you, me, and Dean, whatever the situation may be, it's always the best of times.
Yeah, and I didn't expect today's episode to turn into a Q and A like it did today. I enjoyed asking all the questions, so I hope you didn't mind that.
No, not whatsoever. I love these types of things. So, you didn't bother me whatsoever.
All right. Now, before we sign off for today, Mr. JJ, where can the people find you?
Southern Demonology is a podcast that's been in operation since 2017. You can find us on all major podcasting platforms. And if you go to southerndemonology.com, you'll get links to all of our social sites, in addition to contact forms where you can reach out to me with any questions, requests, etc.
Yep. And if you want one of those medals or if you have any questions, hit that contact form, people.
Yep, exactly.
JJ is a great dude and he's more than happy to help in any way he can. Thanks, folks. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and I hope you have a good day, good weekend, good night, or whenever you're listening to this episode. Thanks again for listening, everyone. Thanks for tuning into today's episode of The Wandering Road. You can find us on Apple, Google, Spotify, and most podcast platforms. Be sure to subscribe and share. Also, don't forget to give a follow on Instagram at twroadpodcast and follow my TikTok at twrpodcast. Take care, and I'll catch you on the next one.